Namaste. My name is Neena Rai, and I'm the author of the books Amazing Ayodhya and Adbhut Ayodhya. Today, on the power table, we have with us Natasha Jha Bhaskar. Natasha ji is the executive director of Newland Global Group, a corporate advisory firm in enhancing bilateral trade and investment relations between Australia and India. So, welcome from Australia.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to this wonderful conversation today.
Why don't we start with you telling us about your journey first?
So, because you've already set the scene and you mentioned Australia, so I think I should start from there.
Yeah.
So, I've been living in Australia for last 7 years. In fact, this week I complete 7 years of living there.
Okay.
Visiting India for work. Prior to moving to Australia, I was working at the Indian Parliament for 12 years.
Okay.
And a lot of my work focus has been in the areas of policy communication and advocacy. And I was part of the founding team of Lok Sabha Television
Wow.
that was set up by former Lok Sabha Speaker, late Shri Somnath Chatterjee. And those were the days we were a very young bunch of very enthusiastic, I would say, professionals straight away, coming out of Masscom Research Center, Jamia Millia Islamia, very enthusiastic, wanting to do things, wanting to learn a lot. And I remember we were told that your biggest ammunition to counter any policy matters or questions being asked by the members of parliament is knowledge. And the way to do that is to read as much as you can, because you were not there. You have not experienced Ayodhya. You have not experienced emergency. You have not experienced many such historical events. So just read and read. And thanks to authors like you, it helps us building that information base, knowledge base. So as I sit here and look back, I feel so deeply grateful because you mentioned Ayodhya. I am born and brought up in Mathura, and it's a blessed city, as I say. And my first foray into city life happened after finishing my school education, and I came to Delhi, did my graduation from Lady Shri Ram College. And that was, I would say, the initial ignition to do something which can create impact.
So at LSR, you did history honors, I believe.
Yes.
So from history honors, how did you get into policy? I'm very curious. How does that happen?
So I'm going to now, bore your viewers with a lot of, personal anecdotes and my journey. So please, this is the question of the interviewer. So, please excuse me on that. So, yes, so I did history and LSR stands for, in our, we do call it Lady Shri Ram College, but we say it leadership with social responsibility.
Okay.
So for us, it was very important that whatever we do has meaning, purpose, and impact. And we continued to focus on these areas. So when I finished my history, I did my Masscom from MCRC Jamia, and then I started working for Lok Sabha Television and Lok Sabha Secretariat. After, just when I was doing that, I was offered a Commonwealth Broadcasting Scholarship to do Masters in Public Policy.
Okay.
So I went on a sabbatical from the Indian Parliament for 1 year. And I was in Brunei, very interestingly, did a lot of research on national level policies. My master's thesis was on Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, NREGA, and the impact it has brought in, and what were the key issues which the government was at that time trying to handle. And so that was the transition to public policy. Now, Indian Parliament is actually, the edifice of Indian democracy, as we say, and a lot of work, that happens in that environment is all central to legislature and, policy making. So that's how it
that's
happened.
the transition. And I
Yes.
believe you're doing your MBA. So that would be, so after history, you did Masscom.
Yes.
After Masscom, you've done policy. And then you're doing your MBA. So this is your fourth degree and your third master's. Am I
My
right?
third master's,
My
yes.
goodness.
Yes. So, very, very interesting question. So, when I finished all of that, 12 years of work, and when I went to Australia, and Australia primarily for family reasons, to join my husband, who's a neurologist there. So, went to Australia, and I realized that this was a very peak time. 2018 was when Australia came out with a dedicated India strategy.
Oh.
And it's a voluminous piece of work written by former High Commissioner of Australia to India, Ambassador Peter Varghese, who was also the Secretary of Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Okay.
And 500 plus page report, a voluminous
Wow.
piece of work that identified 10 states and 10 sectors where Australia must engage with India. And it set some great goals and aspirations. So I went into the market thinking that this is my time to enjoy life and sit back and, experience the natural beauty. And then came NGG. This was April, and in June, I was headhunted for this role. I started writing for Lowy Institute and the Observer Research Foundation, and a lot of such think tanks. And that transitioned me to NGG. Newland is a very niche advisory firm. We are very focused only on one thing, and that's the Australia-India trade and investment space. We are completing 15 years of existence this year, this April on the 23rd. And a key focus for us is that how do we enable and empower companies to access the India market better? And not just companies, but also how do we assist governments on both sides to achieve the goals and the outcomes that they want to, get to through this journey. So that's been my work. Advisory and advocacy are two key pillars of our advisory firm, and it's a symbiotic relationship.
Okay, so we'll start with policy and governance
Yes.
first, and then we'll get on to
Sure.
those questions. So you've spent so much time with the Lok Sabha TV, and then you spent a decade working in the Indian Parliament. So I want to know, what is one of those surprising things or lessons you learned about how policy actually gets made? Because people outside, they don't know what's going inside, and how is a policy formed? What are the key elements? If you can just briefly tell us about that.
Yeah. So again, very interesting question, and there are different elements to it. When we talk about legislation finally getting passed and accepted in the parliament, but a key component and a key tenet of getting policy accepted, implemented, and executed is the element of managing those competing interests. Because there are so many players, and how do you address that? So one thing which to your question of what is it that stand out for me as I reflect on the journey of studying policies in the parliament is I would say the power to pause and negotiate, and how quickly you can do that, because you have to ensure that there is an aspiration that needs to be addressed, and
Correct.
you have to bring everyone on the table. But the best conversations happen off record. So there
That's
will
interesting. The best conversations happen off record.
Yes. So
Okay.
if you're actually trying to extract information, in an arena where you think you'll be able to strike something, and get to a negotiating table, you're not.
Yeah.
So to me, what was very surprising was that there may be two different parties on two extreme ends, but there's always an opportunity to expand the pie and share and understand how we can do things together and manage those interests very responsibly. So from that perspective, Parliament was a very very big lesson, because you have the ruling, you have the opposition, you have the opposition has its own interests, the ruling party has its own interests, and how do you actually create that negotiating table? So that's a best place to actually learn negotiation, I would say. Means I come from the days when the Lok Sabha Speaker Somnath Chatterjee, used tools like being a head teacher. He used to call himself a head teacher in the Lok Sabha premises, and saying that MPs are not listening to me because they're only shouting and screaming and not creating the kind of decorum that's required, because we've seen some very volatile debates during that
Not
time.
a lot of them go there for policy. A lot of them go there for their TV, that little quick bite on TV. They can get
Yes.
viral,
Yes.
and they go there to disrupt. Not all of them are,
Yes.
very keen
Yes.
on it.
Yes.
Anyways, so, let's come back to India. And India today has, acquired a very significant place in the changing global paradigm, right? Now, at an economic level and at a very diplomatic level, how should the changing world view, transformation, and how is new India? I mean, what is transforming new India? What's new India different? Like, how is it different?
See,
And
again,
what's changing?
yeah, so sitting in Australia, when I have to communicate this, to our clients and to a lot of our stakeholders who may have visited India in early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, have a very different experience of India. And to them, they are caught in that bubble.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to, communicate to them that how India has changed, how the narrative
Rapidly.
needs to shift.
Yeah.
So the one way to approach this, that India of yesterday is not the India of today, and the first way to do that is, and I generally tell this to everyone I meet in Australia, is please go and visit India. That's the first thing to break that ice and to feel confident that whatever you're going to do in the market is, coming with a lot of accountability and responsibility. The second thing is, New India today is a rule maker. In a way, we are asking for reciprocal opportunities.
Correct.
We are asking for a bigger say, in the realm of things, and I think that's the kind of shift which we have witnessed, which we had not seen earlier, from a global point of view. From a market sense, uh, the companies still have not understood the complexity of the India market.
What do you think has gotten this shift?
I think the range of initiatives which the government has taken, we cannot deny, how things have moved, the whole ease of doing business, the range of ministries, the infrastructure, the digital connect, the digital public infrastructure, the social care, the social sector schemes, and having a more ecosystem approach rather than an ad hoc approach or a silo-centric approach to, managing things. So there has been an end-to-end kind of a shift that we have witnessed, and the way India is being perceived is very experiential. Rather than I'll quote Rama Bijapurkar, who writes a lot on consumer economy, and she says that India is like a kaleidoscope. Every time you turn it, you experience it. It's enticing, it's real, and it's changing. And you also need to understand that the depth, the breadth of the Indian market is so diverse that no data, no figure remains relevant after 3 months, right? So
3 months.
that's a quarter, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it's very important that you constantly update yourself. The knowledge needs to be constantly updated. At Newland, we are actually working on a very strong business literacy piece to educate the companies about what's changing in the India market and what companies have achieved in the India market, because people don't know what the legacy companies of India have achieved, what the Tatas or ABGs or large FMCG companies have done in the market, but
Correct.
similarly also what Australian companies have done in the market. But I'll tell you more about it as we go
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
Yes.
So you mentioned about the Newland Group and what you're doing,
Yeah.
and apart from all of that, you're strengthening the Australia-India ties, correct? And so, what's the biggest opportunity that you see for these two nations? I mean, India and Australia in the next decade. How should they take it forward? Like, what's the biggest opportunity?
I think the biggest opportunity, as you know, that we've signed the interim trade agreement, which is called the Australia-India Economic Cooperation Trade Agreement, which was interestingly came after substantial. Let me tell the viewers a little more about Australia-India
Sure.
bilateral relations.
Yeah.
So the biggest churning happened when Prime Minister Modi, in 2014, visited Australia, and he spoke at the Central Hall in Canberra, and he said that Australia is no longer in the periphery of our vision, but is at the center of our thoughts. This visit happened after 28 years by any Indian Prime Minister, so that should tell you the kind of significance which was attached to this relationship, and how the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott was the first foreign Prime Minister to visit Prime Minister Modi when he became the Prime Minister here. So that kind of Bonhomian relationship we saw starting again in 2014. The bilateral relation has always been kind of a roller coaster ride. Goes up, goes down. What we are trying to achieve now is how do you create a situation, a transition, agnostic kind of a relationship. So irrespective of whichever government comes into power, or whichever way the world goes, this relationship is solid.
That's a very smart thing to do,
Yeah.
because governments will change, policies may or may not change, but there should be some sort of a roadmap that establishes this connection.
Right.
Okay, so trade and investment between Australia and India obviously have grown since then. What challenges are still there? And if there's a barrier, if there were, I mean, of course, there are many barriers, but if there was one barrier that you could remove or you would like to see dismantled, which one is it and how?
Yeah. So as I was talking about the bilateral relations specifically, what has happened is, irrespective of the roadmaps that we have created, and we have had quite a few. We have had a voluminous India Economic Strategy report. We have had an Australia Economic Strategy authored by Ambassador Anil Vadva, the first ever written by Ministry of Commerce and Industry for Australia. And then we have a new economic roadmap that's just come out. So the aspirations, the intent is very focused. But in terms of the key issue that remains and the barrier that I personally see is the awareness and the market literacy. Business literacy is the piece, the perception of the market. So you talk to large corporates in Australia, they're still not ready for the India market. They're still buying their time. And the message that we give them is that India has got many suitors, right? So if you don't take the plunge now, you are going to miss this opportunity. So that's where I feel is a lot of work that needs to be done and fill those knowledge gaps, information gaps, information asymmetry that exists between India and Australia.
So you think that they are not able to take the steps to come to India because of information asymmetry?
Yes.
That's the
yes,
main,
yes,
and that's
yes,
something that you would
yes.
want to see dismantled.
Yes, and the opportunity story, even if it is clear, it's still not clear in the heads that how do you go from one point to another. So which state to go to, which opportunities, how do you strike that balance? And then again, I think market intelligence, cultural intelligence, navigating those relationships, and really looking not just at outcomes, but building those relations in a long term and creating that kind of a strategic partnership with companies on this side. There's a lot of work that has happened, Neena. So I must credit the Australian government for taking a range of initiatives that they have done, and the way Indian government has reciprocated. We have seen a range of visits. In fact, in the last 2 years, if I have to just give you a random figure, we have had over 15 visits from senior ministers across education, health, infrastructure. In fact, Prime Minister Modi was in Sydney in 2023. We have seen a lot of high impact visits, but visits alone cannot be the metrics of success, right? So that's where our challenge is: how do we convert these trade and investment figures from where it sits today to a bigger number?
So, do you think that one of these differences, them not being able to come, is there's a bit of cultural difference that is there, which is causing it? And there obviously there are cultural differences, but do you think that affects the business? Number one, and do these cultural differences between Australia and India also affect the diplomatic relationships and the economic relationships?
See, cultural differences is something which will happen with any country you engage with, right? So that's actually a constant in diplomacy. And needless to say, we'll have to find our ways. How do we navigate these relationships, and how do we actually build cultural intelligence to engage with the country on the other side? I think there's a strong sense among the Australian companies now that India is a place of joyful complexity, and it can be a chaotic market, but it's a market which offers you so many opportunities that even if you take just one section of it or one state of it, you can massively create great narratives of engagement, be it in manufacturing, critical minerals, clean technology, education, ed tech, med tech. So you name it, and the opportunities are there. We have seen some great Australian companies striking those partnerships. Companies like Atlassian, Canva, are doing remarkably well. We have the Commonwealth Bank.
Canva is Australian.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes,
Okay.
Canva is Australian.
Yeah.
Then we have ANZ, and then CBA. So a large, Tata BlueScope Steel partnership. So these are companies who are actually charting that growth path and building those large number of strategic partnerships. To your point on cultural intelligence, I think even the Indians would need to accept that Australians, Australians' way of doing business, right? Which is like a little bit of dark humor and straight talk.
Yes.
So
And very casual.
very casual.
Yes,
Very casual.
and the clothing is also very casual. actionable, which
Yes.
catches Indians off guard. And the other thing is that the Indians are so used to British English
Yes.
that, Aussie, 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 and good day, mate. It's like, what? What are you saying? I know English, but what English are you speaking?
Yes,
So
yes.
the Australian accent, I'm aware that a lot of Indians have a tough time. I mean to say Indians in India have a
Yeah.
very tough time understanding the Australian English twang. I call it the twang,
Twang.
because it's so. Anyways, so what I'm surprised about is that even though Australia has a massive Indian diaspora, right, and sometimes it's called the living bridge between both the countries. So how come this is not being leveraged
Yeah.
already? Because if you already have such a big diaspora, you can leverage it for business back home in India. And what can India do more to leverage the potential of its Indian community in Australia to promote its relationship to a higher trajectory of growth?
A great question. So we are over 1 million strong Indian diaspora now in Australia, and we are constantly growing. These numbers are going. International students, medical professionals, engineers, skilled workers, across a range of industry. These professionals are making their impact. We have Indian CEOs. Of course, if you compare them with the numbers in US, we're still reaching there. The aspiration is still there, but at the leadership level, we still need a lot of Asians, I would say, Indians and other representation. We still don't see that boardroom presence and leadership presence. But having said that, I think to your point on how do we maximize the potential and how do we leverage the diaspora, Indian diaspora. It's important that we understand what they are good at and possibly map the Indian diaspora and their capabilities and use them to globalize India's development agendas. Means we have done quite a few presentations and we work very closely with the High Commission of India in Canberra and the Consulate General of India in Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, as well as Melbourne. And we've worked on a range of areas where I think it's important that we identify the skills and then try and include them in discussions which is relatable to their specific sectors. So if Australia and India are currently looking at workforce mobility in the area of medical professionals, there's an opportunity to understand from the people who are in the space, in the diaspora, in the healthcare sector, to what is it like to do things, how we can actually execute them. So really globalizing those development agendas, making them feel more included because
Do you think that there is some sort of a narrative shift that is required, for the ties to pick up? Like you've mentioned these things, but these are very sort of, actionable things.
Yes.
And then there is narrative building, and there's narrative. Do you think there needs to be a shift there? And, what role can the government play in getting these businesses?
Absolutely. Narrative is central to all of this. How India is understood in Australia, and do people in Australia understand India the way they should? We've been saying that you got to mainstream the India story in Australian media. If you look at the coverage on India,
So who will do this? Whose job is it to do this? The mainstreaming of.
I think everyone, people, I would say the diaspora, the government, we've got a lot of agencies and institutions which are specifically entrusted with the work of building the relationship. So I think they have an opportunity. They have enough funding and incentives on their side to build that kind of a pathway to ensure that these narrative building initiatives are included. And there is a lot of work that's already happening, but I think mainstreaming the India story through media is still very limited.
Do you think only through media it's going to be effective, or is going to be effective, let's say, if one big business also comes to India? So, for example, I lived in the Middle East for the longest time, and I know that a lot of supermarkets were started by Indians or Indian origin people. So there was, like, let's say, Choitrams, and then there was Lulu, or, I mean, they're different. I'm not getting the exact, I mean, I don't want to take all exact names.
Yeah.
But because there were these supermarkets, there were these personality driven businesses,
Yes.
it created this impact. It created some kind of a standard of, let's say, okay, this is what you get, this is an Indian business, this is, so do you think this also matters?
Absolutely.
And in Australia, do we have something like this as of now?
No, so we have companies, as I mentioned, like Atlassian, Canva. These are all creating those success stories, right? And when you do get inspired, and you're like, if they can do it, we can also do it. Why not just go and explore the market? Means we have had board visits from ANZ, from West Farmers, and a lot of large ASX listed companies coming to India and traveling around, trying to understand what the opportunity is, how do they actually expand in the market. And I think that's where the business literacy piece works. If someone is doing it, I want to know more, I want to do it more, and I want to see if I can do it right or not. So there is that initial ignition which is there, but the narrative piece will not happen overnight. We got to understand that it's something where you have to have a short-term, mid-term, long-term strategy. There is a very strong historical baggage that you're dealing with, and there are perceptions. We've had policies where there has been a substantial struggle to accept and assimilate. But not to forget that Australia is a very multicultural community.
I know.
We
So
have a
that's what I wonder. Why do they have problems assimilating? Because I mean, they are so diverse, and if you go to Australia, you find it's like Mishran.
Yes,
it's like
yes.
what we used to consider Egypt in the ancient days, Mishr.
Yes.
Egypt technically is called Misr as
Yes,
well. It's
yes.
supposed to be a mixture.
Yes. So there's no. Means I'd correct you. I'll just try and reframe
Yeah.
it. It's not the problem of assimilation. I think it's more about how quickly we can do this. Right. We are already, as I mentioned. So I'll give you my story. So I live in in one of the Indian suburbs of Sydney, and the number of temples and the community opportunities that's created for people around is massive, and the way the government has actually moved ahead to make these things possible for the community is again very great. So, and I think that gets reflected eventually for both sides to come and interact together, and we have seen that getting reflected also in the visits of our ministers.
So, if you had an aspiration, so you speak very positively of them,
Yeah.
you speak very positively of
Yeah.
this relationship. So, if
Yes.
you had an aspiration for Australia and their relationship, what would that be? And what obstacles do you see in this relationship?
I think for me, if I have to have a specific aspiration for Australia, India, as I was saying earlier, I would want this to be transition and situation agnostic, so that you don't
What do
have
you
to.
mean by transition and situation
What that means is
agnostic?
that they become indispensable allies, right? So it is not something which is actually a reaction to something that would have happened in 2020, because a lot of our ties, a big jump in the bilateral relationship happened post COVID. We became comprehensive strategic partners
With
the
Quad as well.
with Quad and with the Indo-Pacific narrative, and then since the signing of AI-ECTA, which many would say was primarily a response to China's belligerence to the Australian market, and Australia decided to diversify economically. So it was a big gain for us. So what we need to do is we need to ensure that that long-term vision and strategy for this relationship remains and is constantly, the momentum is still maintained. And engagement, I generally say, is a national project, and it should be seen as a national project. So commitment and consistency is the key to really ensuring that this relationship is not ad hoc, something that we have experienced decades ago in this bilateral relationship. We continue doing what we do. We create an ecosystem where we have the role of corporates very, very well. The cultural diplomats are also there. We have a strong role of diaspora. So we have really, ensured that all the levers of the relationship are well oiled to ensure that there's a solid outcome on the other side.
So let's say our viewership is very young. So if let's say we have the viewers in Australia and we have the viewers in India. So let's say the young Indians in Australia, what would you say that they can do to enhance this relationship? Would you?
Brilliant question. And I always say this, that the young Indians in Australia, if they are born in Australia, you have a direct advantage. You can actually convert your friends as Indophiles, right?
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to talk about India in classroom settings, in professional settings. You need to talk about the achievements that India is making. If you yourself don't know, ask your parents, ask your family, travel to India, explore. And I'm aware of a lot of young, students. In fact, a large bunch of them, working with us. They really are very curious about India and where it is, and something that they would have heard, from their parents and families. And because of the access and network, and because of they being truly, assimilated in this Australian community, they have a direct advantage to bring a group of friends. So the only way to mainstream the India story is through ensuring that you talk about India's growth in whichever setting you are in. Do not miss that opportunity.
Yeah, because I think that I believe that, and I have lived abroad for so long, I believe that every Indian who is outside of India is an ambassador.
Exactly.
Is an ambassador for India. And how you behave, you're going to create the perception for everybody in the host country
Yes.
as to how Indians are and
Absolutely.
how Indians behave, because they are not going to understand the numerous number of states and the cultural differences. They're just going to see one face and name, and that's India, right?
Exactly.
So it's a brilliant thing that you've said, and I'm
Yeah.
glad you are putting that responsibility on young shoulders.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, a lot of young generation, when they go abroad, they think, oh, no one knows me here.
Yeah.
I can get up to all naughty things that I have not been up to.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the wrong approach to have there, because people are constantly judging you, especially in a foreign country, because you need to sort of adapt there as well.
Absolutely. And, in terms of demystifying that complexity, I'll give you a recent example.
Sure.
I'm also a UN Women Scholar at the University of Sydney.
Yeah.
And as one of our programs, I was meant to present something on digital technology and innovation, to a classroom of senior executives.
Sure.
It was a very interesting experience because I decided to talk about Aadhaar. And how Aadhaar and UPI have actually, the whole India stack has changed, the way India consumes.
And I just want to cut into that. I remember how when UPI was introduced during COVID time, they laughed. And a lot of politicians were like, you think that the lady who's selling vegetables on the roadside is going to be able to operate this?
Yeah.
And today, only the vegetable sellers on the roadside, they are the ones who get the maximum UPI, because no one carries so much change
Absolutely.
today. No one is going to carry 24 rupees or get the exact change for 28 rupees and 90 paise,
Absolutely.
right? So it's
Absolutely.
just amazing.
I can speak out of experience. I've been here. This is my, I've been here for the last 20 days now,
Yeah.
and I'm only using UPI. So I don't have cash. I only carry my mobile phone wherever I'm going, from sabji walas to auto walas to everybody. And you feel so empowered. You feel that you don't have to worry about anything. So it's just made life so easy. So that was a conversation that we had, and I was in a way very surprised because 1.4 billion population, and the access of this digital public infrastructure that we have created, and the awareness of that was so limited. Of course, there were quite a few, and who knew about UID and the India stack, and the curiosity in the room was massive. So that told me that if you tell a story, people are curious to know.
Yes.
But it's important that you initiate that, you ignite that curiosity.
Yes.
You can't imagine that they will not, be they'll know for themselves.
I remember that there were some embassies, and so the embassy folks had come down and they had gone to buy tea. And so they were paying with UPI for 12 rupees or 18 rupees, whatever the tea might have cost, because they were buying the roadside tea. And they were all very surprised with how easily things were done. And what made me feel proud is how they wanted to replicate this in Europe.
Yeah.
So that, I think, speaks volume about how it speaks volume about New India.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So let's you mentioned Quad and all of that. So let's get on to SAARC, ASEAN, and BRICS. Now, you've been a part of these delegations, SAARC, ASEAN, BRICS. Now, how do you see the power dynamics shifting in these multilateral forums today? And what's your I mean, we'll finish this one, then we'll come on Quad.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think, the SAARC, ASEAN, and BRICS summits, which I attended, were very different from where we are today now.
Correct.
And we are in a very VUCU world where we talk about volatility and the ambiguity of doing everything. But I think in terms of multilateralism, uh, what we have understood is that the dialogue and diplomacy are going to go together. And everything comes down to the utility concept that if you have a seat on the table, how you can not just make yourself heard, but how you can actually contribute meaningfully. And I think that's where the India story is massive. You know, what we have done in Global South, what we are trying to do, and how we are trying to raise issues which is actually, a kind of significance, not just for us as a country, but for at a global level. So multilateralism and the very understanding of this dynamics has shifted in a big way. When it comes to Australia, we have found us as partners in Australia for in the Quad, in SCRI, which is the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, and of course Indo-Pacific. Now, as rule-loving nations and as stable nations, uh, uh, ours is a very value and principle based engagement, and that's something makes us very aligned, and there are ready made synergies, with Australia in these multilateral forums as well, which I feel makes from a strategic perspective also makes us a very strong ally. And
When you
yeah.
speak of allies, we are allies. Let's say we are a part of the Quad,
Yeah.
and there has been a renewed interest, even recent, as much as recently, right? So why do you think that, and what's your take on this renewed interest? And of course, the focused activities of the Indo-Pacific,
Yeah.
which is now emerging as a new epicenter of economic and strategic activities. So what do you think is happening here? Why is there this renewed interest?
Well, the renewed interest is because we've always seen two separate poles of power, right? And that's something which has been in big debate, and we have seen the repercussions of that, and we constantly see the repercussions as we talk. But it's also important that we have those unanimous voices which are on the same side and can create narratives which actually is aware of the human impact of issues that concerns at a global level. Now, Quad, Indo-Pacific, and these multilateral structures that have been created are addressing issues like climate change, are addressing issues like clean tech. In fact, if we just look at the Indo-Pacific economic framework, it talks about the capabilities of each of these countries and how these capabilities can be aligned to create a more responsible supply chain. So let's just take an example of critical minerals. We are in the age of semiconductors, we are in the age of electric vehicles, but none of these countries have actually have the critical mineral resource. Because we do have resources. Australia has ample critical mineral resources,
Coal,
but
etc., everything.
so, talk about nickel, talk about cobalt, talk about lithium. So, these are the critical minerals that we are
Correct.
talking
Yeah.
about. Now, they are defining the new economy, new energy economy, as we talk about energy transitions, as we talk about net zero by 2070 from an Indian perspective, but 2050 is what in Australia. So, the only way to achieve these goals is by building those allyship, by ensuring that we can, transfer technologies, create, momentum through financing architectures. Because if you just, we're advising a few critical mineral miners, the big challenge is investment. How do you bring in the kind of funds that are required to ensure, there is extraction of these resources, and then that's there's a value add, and then we can actually take it to countries and manufacture. So all these challenges can only be addressed when what we do is we bridge capacities and capabilities, and let's also accept no one country can be good in everything.
Correct.
Right? So when that's an issue, the only way is to collaborate, co-create, co-innovate. And I think that's where our biggest potential is to really, take it. And multilateralism in today's world will be defined by that.
And when it comes to Australia, specifically in its relationship with India, they have released a new economic roadmap, right? Previously, we have had the IES 2035
Yeah.
and AES
Yeah.
that identify sectors and states on prevailing opportunities. So, what would you want both the countries to do differently from here? Because that's already done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I think if I just have to think about the first India economic strategy report that was released in 2018, it actually categorically said that there's no market which has more potential over the next 20 years for Australia than India, and Australia might fall behind other countries if it is not giving India the kind of attention it needs. So it was said in very blunt, straight terms what needs to be done there.
so
Yeah.
ignore India on your own peril.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So it was categorically stated in Ambassador Peter Varghese report.
Yeah.
But most recently, we have seen a new economic roadmap that has come out, and it talks about clean tech, tourism, education, and sectors which will and agribusiness, because these are sectors of extreme importance for Australia, and it sees immediate opportunities, for India as well. So the new economic roadmap is has a clear-cut implementation plan, and it defines that how we get from one A point to B point. But to your question on what we need to need to do differently, I would say that we really need to you know force ourselves to ensure that we do quick execution. Because
Quick
there's a
turnarounds, quick
yes, and look at
executions.
those low-hanging fruits where we can immediately make the relationship going, and ensure that these results are delivered in stipulated times. I always say, let's not focus on too many activities. Let's focus on outcomes.
Yes,
So there's a lot of discussion and activities, but
correct.
are these activities, changing themselves
Yielding.
into commercial outcomes? Is something
Yeah,
that
are they
one.
yielding results or
Yeah.
not? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, only results matter.
Yes.
And
Yes.
intentions in these economic activities don't really count, right?
Absolutely.
So it is believed that both the countries can ink CECA and the full-fledged FTA by the end of this year. And we've seen the benefits of ECTA. What has changed in the outlook of both the countries for each other?
I think one thing that we realized when we signed ECTA, and I must say that ECTA was signed very quickly in a very the conversations and the negotiations happened within a span of 6 months. So it was put on fast track. Australia had a special trade envoy, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who, in his guidance made this happen, and then the deal came through, and now we are negotiating the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. The key departure when the trade deal happened was that there can never be a perfect deal, right? So it's now or never. So do not, waste too much time in thinking about getting that perfect deal, which may not happen ever.
Correct, correct.
But look at getting something which you can quickly,
Exactly.
ink.
Yeah.
So ECTA was a reflection of that, where. In fact, interestingly, it was also, if I remember correctly, the first trade deal in a decade signed by India with a developed economy. So a massive shift also from a mindset shift that we have seen in India, and the way India has approached signing of economic trade agreements. Having said that, the another reflection on this piece has been that you can walk and talk both at the same time. So you don't have to stop yourself. And as we negotiate CECA, the bigger focus is now on how do we make maximum gains, how do we also look at services. ECTA was on reduced and removed duties on 86% of goods. So it was very goods focused, but this particular CECA will include a range of items and services as well. That's what
Okay,
the
so
intention is.
that was my other
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
What should be the or what would be the focus of CECA between India and Australia? Because I know that CECA has different focuses for different countries,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
So if see, obviously, I'm not privy to what the negotiators currently are discussing, but we've been helping the government on a range of sectors to build CECA recommendations and to build policy recommendations across different sectors. We've been working very closely with the Consulate General in Sydney, and we identified key sectors like workforce mobility, advanced manufacturing, clean tech, net zero, critical minerals, and we provided very detailed recommendations to the consulate and the High Commission, which has now been sent to the trade negotiators. But I think in terms of if one has to imagine, and we'll be in an imaginary state till we get to know what exactly. If one has to just imagine what CECA should include, or what will be the larger themes around CECA, I would say the three words that comes to mind is access, ambition, and agility. And by access, I would mean that it should go beyond just trade in goods, but also be looking at services and looking at talent, capital, and ensuring that we have created those channels where movement is easy, mobility is easy, because that remains a very debatable piece when we talk about a full-fledged agreement. The second is ambition. So how do we go beyond just tariffs and goods, but also look at services which can further create momentum in this relationship for India. Focus on data flows, focus on innovation, focus on technology transfer. How do we protect intellectual property? So creating those mechanisms which are more responsible and accountable. And the third thing is agility. No agreement is full and final. So be responsive. Ensure that you have enough mechanisms in place where you can quickly tinker it and still be flexible enough to include new things, because as I said, we are living in a very different world than we were a few decades ago. So agility will be extremely important in these policies.
So, we speak about this power quad and all of that, and I'm very curious, in your view, what, what gives a country influence? And especially in global policy discussions, we've been discussing CECA, ECTA, all of this, right? Is it economic might, soft power, or is it something else? Is it like, so quad, let's say with quad, we were trying to sort of we were trying to counter China, right? So how do you think this happens? In the global policy discussions, what has influence? Economic might, soft power, something else? What would you say?
This is a very interesting question, because influence in itself is a very powerful word.
But the reason I'm asking this is because the young generation, the newer generation, and the people who are not directly doing the kind of jobs that you are doing, for them, this is a very different silo. And how do we understand that so that we can integrate this and understand and make it a part of our lives as well, right?
Absolutely.
This is the reason, this is for the audiences.
Yes,
right?
yes. So if I have to answer that question, first thinking about what this means for governments or at a global level,
Yeah.
and then demystify this at an individual level.
Correct.
What do we understand by influence? I would say that real influence comes from being predictable and being useful. Are you resourceful enough to make that change happen, to ensure that change happens? And from that perspective, I think having a seat at the table is fine, but will you be a country which people will call when they are in trouble? Or will you be a country which will just be quoted in few instances? And I think that's, for me, is influence.
So you said two things: being predictable
And being useful.
Being useful. So in terms of psychology, one of the things that we see in people who have a lot of power and influence, they are predictable. And they have influence, and this is how, and their influence is, and how do you how do you measure influence? How do you measure influence is, so if I have to think of something, you don't have to tell me directly.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm thinking of you already. How would you judge me on it? How would you do it? How would so and so do it? So for example, if today a lot of girls follow fashion, right? So they have been influenced by one of the other actresses.
Absolutely.
The actress doesn't have to tell them what to do. They're already copying that, or they're already putting that judgment in the head. That's influence, right? So those are very interesting things that I think that, and I'm giving this example because a lot of the audience is young generation.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they're able to correlate with what is influence, what counts as power,
Yes.
and what makes negotiations, what makes the dynamics between two countries, right?
Yeah. And the way, the kind of role India has played, let's not forget, post-COVID, the vaccine diplomacy,
Absolutely.
and the fact that, countries were calling for assistance and help, and the way we have, shared that responsibility and shared the anxiety of nations and been there, done that. To me, that is influence. To me, that is resourceful. And, it really, gives you a different kind of power, which is very difficult to measure, but that intangible value of power is non-negotiable.
Correct, absolutely. And, talking of power, you've worked with numerous parliamentarians and policymakers, right? And at the highest levels. So, what is one trait that you've noticed in people? And you're talking of influence, right? So, what is one trait that you've noticed in people who wield power very effectively? So, there is influence.
Yeah.
And then there is the ability to wield power, right? Influence is also power. So, what is one trait that you've noticed in people who do this well?
I think they're generally very curious. They ask smart questions.
Okay.
They ask sharp questions, and they wield power with, not power over.
Okay.
So to them, it's about taking everyone together.
Okay.
So very, very inclusive. And my observation, and I will connect this more so with leadership, right? That in general, if you look at leaders who really stand out, are the ones who do not consciously influence, who are not, who actually are doing things, and that creates the influence, which makes them so influential. So it's kind of, the one key thing which I personally feel, and especially for your young viewers, is very important, is to never stop asking questions. To not stop being curious. No question is a foolish question. All questions are great. And never stop learning, because the only way to grow is to know that, I need to know certain things, and there are things which I don't know. So, and I'll just talk about my personal experience. There's so many things that I don't know, and I have no shame in asking that.
You're pursuing your third master's.
Absolutely. So that should say it all.
Yeah, you are one of those people who walks the talk, right? So yeah, please, but carry on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we enjoy and we learn, and do not stop yourself. Do not get defined or define yourself. Be extremely agile. Be very flexible. Do not be siloed. Into a model and thinking that this is what I can do. I think we are living in a time which is very interdisciplinary. So to your point, you did history, and then you did trade and investment, and you're doing trade and investment now, and you did mass communication. Reason is that this is something which I observe, and I've observed this mostly, in our ecosystem here. But if you look at other countries, it's so interdisciplinary, and we are now, through our new education policy, are trying to bring those elements of education.
Correct.
You got to be good in everything. You need to know, because the market today is looking for skills.
That saying, jack of all trades. And what they don't say is the next line, which is a master of a few, the master of a few.
Yeah.
So this is what has come back into fashion today. And you raised a very interesting point about being curious. Do you know curiosity is the active principle, or is the actionable principle of high intelligence? So most high intelligent people are very curious. And you said, one of the things that people are able to yield power is that they have the knowledge of it. That means they've done their homework. So if I have to translate this for the younger generation that watches our show, do your homework.
Yeah.
continue your knowledge, be curious, ask the questions, and there's no stupid questions, right? Did I
Yeah.
get those points correctly?
Absolutely.
Okay, any other point?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Okay, and talking of your education
Yeah.
and writing, you've written so much, right?
Yeah.
Third masters, different, and one of the things I also want to add to the viewers is that one of the reasons you're able to speak so well, explain your point, put your point across, is perhaps because of your education in mass communication. I have noticed that those people who have taken an interest in mass communication, whatever subject that they may have studied or whatever their passion project is, they're able to perform slightly better, or let's say three shades better. I'm not going to say two shades, but just because then they have the ability. So either they have a degree in it or they have learnt it as their own
Yeah.
passion.
Yeah.
They have continued this. And that I notice gives them a very good edge in being able to put their point across, right? And you don't have to be taught on how to break it down for a younger audience. Otherwise, otherwise what happens is that if you speak to people who are like super specialists, it's very difficult for them to be able to convert this in a way that the younger audiences
Yeah.
or the audiences that are not specific to that industry or that specialization are able to understand. So that's really good.
And I think we are living in a time where it's very important that we are able to deconstruct those big, concepts, big theories, because not everyone is a mathematician, not everyone is, a doctor. So how do you make information easy to digest for people who do not understand but still curious? And I think a lot of that changed since the emergence of digital influences, because we have seen so much knowledge percolating, and there's so much information dissemination happening, that there's a genuine interest for people, and anyone who's actually who has successfully deconstructed that story has a following in million now.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed on social media, especially Twitter, X, or even YouTube, is that there are a few people who understand or who take the time to understand these tough concepts, which the experts are not able to break it for us. And then they go and write very lucid few liners that then the general public understands and is able to effectively at least get the gist of it. Otherwise, like I had mentioned earlier, economics, policy, everything is like different silos. And the reason I'm saying this is when social media has come, when there is Instagram, the focus is not on policy, the focus is not on these subjects, but the focus is more on like dance, the focus is like trendsetters, everybody is an influencer, but influencing what?
Absolutely.
They are selling things for influence, like in the sense that buy this lipstick, buy this, buy that. Very few are getting attracted to the sort of policy, and of course when we talk of numbers, majority are. But if you take a look at the scrolling, the dead scrolling of night, you'll notice, you'll understand what I'm
Absolutely.
saying.
No, and I think what we are in a phase where we have actually democratized access to information, and that's very powerful. But are we smart enough, for the youngsters who are watching this, are we smart enough to make smart choices? That's where I think a true key skill still needs to be developed, to not to be influenced in whichever way you are told to go, but to be smart enough to know that this is not something which I'm ready for, is not meant for me, and that requires a lot of hand holding. That will not happen overnight. That will not happen. That's where education, comes into being. Peer group comes into being. Family, values, systems, culture, all that comes into being. So I'm a firm believer that you need that ecosystem who can handhold you, and the necessities of digital stuff is great, but you got to know that your values and your learnings will anchor you to that reality, which will take you to the next level.
Of course.
So that's something which is very important.
So, amongst all your other achievements, there is also the achievement of being named Young Professional of the Year in 2019, right? You were named Australia's Woman to Watch in International Affairs, UN Women Australia Scholar, Chief Executive Women's Scholar. What advice would you give to young women looking to break into policy or diplomacies. And I'm asking this specifically because, we just discussed influence and Instagram and how women are only thinking of influence as in selling lipstick or being there on Instagram because it's easy. These are low hanging fruits. What you have done is tougher, right? 3 master's degrees, all of that, right? And you've broken into what we have traditionally considered male domain, which is policy, economics, and all the things that you're doing.
So to answer that question, I think my journey has not been a journey which I never thought about it that something is male dominated or women dominated. So whether I should enter this arena or not. So I think that's the first thing that what you want to do, you just want to do, and you just carry on that. But the second thing which I've personally found very important is, and in my interactions with women colleagues and with my peer group, I often come across a kind of a reality which is like we are all wired with this negativity bias, which is around focusing on what we are not than what we can be. Right? Focusing on what we don't want than what we really want. So I think that's where we need to shift our focus and believe in that innate strength and the power that we already have, rather than self-doubting ourselves. Because a good starting point is to know that you're capable enough, you have that power. Because if we start claiming that power for ourselves, we will change the nature of power. And the way we talk about ourselves, the way we approach things, the way we negotiate, in situations, that will only happen if we are not wired with this negativity bias.
So you said something very interesting. You said the way we talk about ourselves, the way we negotiate, the way we do that, that calls for a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And before self-awareness comes self-acceptance. Or both of them maybe are, very similar to each other. Am I right? What tips would you give to the young women watching to increase this in themselves? Like, how did you do it? Like, the things.
So I think first thing is having mentors, having role models. So I'll start with my family. I've had role models. My mom was married at the age of 16. So I happened to her when she was just 17, and then she went on to do her studies, and she's now an educator. So the reason I say this is that I've had role models in my life where I've seen that gender is not an issue. It's primarily your commitment and conviction, and what is it that you want to do will take you to the next level. So the first thing is, if you are in doubt, if you don't know something, please ask. Be surrounded with people, reach out to people, please feel free to reach out to me if you need any advice. Means I love to mentor young women, and I will be very open to answer any questions, anything that you would be interested in, because the more women we have, in this ecosystem, the more women will be encouraged, and you'll have those role models from whom you can learn. So that's something which is very important. The second thing is, if you are a woman yourself who is in a certain position or power, your responsibility is to lift as you climb. So that's something which is again very important, because you got to champion other women. You need to understand their story, their journey, their life story. So you need to honor their journey. A lot of interactions I feel at times, again in silos, can be that if I can do it, everyone else can do it. But no, maybe not. We don't know the circumstances they are in. So that empathy is very important. That realization of their journey is very important. So there's several factors. But to the young women, I would say that never for a minute you should think that do not underestimate yourself, and just believe in creating. But what is important here is, and which is a constant in anything that you do, is hard work.
Yes.
You've got to be hardworking. You've got to be committed. Nothing is served on a platter.
Correct.
Right. So that's something which is very important. And if you're one of those, everything will come to you.
And one of the things that I have noticed with the younger generation, and this is something that has been perpetuated with the younger generation, and I don't know whether this is Western or Indian, I don't understand this. Your mother got married at 16, right? And then she did what she did. This is because in our grandparents' generation, they thought that if children have to grow, they have to grow together. So both the boy and the girl have to be married, and then they will explore and grow together. So they both, the husband and wife, have to help each other. This is why, this is one of the reasons when our, because our mothers got married early, they had us early, right?
Yeah.
But now the current idea is, and which is given to the girls is, and to the boys as well, is that no, marriage is going to stop your growth. Instead of, you have to find a partner who helps you grow,
Yeah.
they are taught against them, which is, I think, detrimental to both the sexes.
Yeah.
And is sort of stopping a lot of women from pursuing both family life as well as career life. This is something that I observed, and since you raised that point that your mom married and then she continued because it was a wish,
Yeah.
it was also the generational mindset at that time,
Yes.
that both
Yes.
people will grow together. And it's very, very generous of you to offer help to the other young girls, which
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of them will pick it up, right? So just to wrap it up, I want to ask you this interesting question. If you were to sit down with the leaders of India and Australia tomorrow, what is that one question that you would ask them to push this collaboration forward, the India Australia? And you've mentioned so many things like how can this trade be constant, how can we foster this, how do we iron out the cultural differences as well, and some very interesting points. So I want to know what is that you're going to.
I think if I have to ask these questions,
Yes.
in terms of, to your point, where this relationship should go,
Yeah.
I would say that, what's their vision, 50-year long-term vision for this relationship, and what would they like to be remembered for? What sort of shared legacy would they create?
Yeah.
Because all that we are trying to do is great, but if it is not taking us somewhere where we see a larger societal impact, a larger capacity building, capability building, a shift in the ecosystem, a whole new chapter in creating those innovation stories, collaborative developments models, creating new governance models. It'll be just creating a dent. We are not making that major, rapid transition. So my question would primarily be that what is that 50-year long-term vision, and how do you envision creating that shared legacy, which our successors, would be very proud of.
Yeah, 50 years is a very long time. I was thinking more on like if people can even manage 5 and 10 years, that's a lot. But 50 years is, even
Yes.
I didn't think of 50 years.
Yeah.
But it's been lovely to have you here with us on the Power Table. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and also guiding the younger generation on how to go about if they want to be in the same fields as you are. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you so
here.
much, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope that the youngsters will chart the growth story that we are on, and the new India story. And I think all of us are very, trying very hard to make India Viksit Bharat by 2047. And I think we cannot achieve this through the demographic dividend that we have got in this youth. So it's important that each one of us create that meaning, purpose, and impact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.